High in the rugged mountains of eastern Turkey, less than 2 miles from the Iranian border, an advanced artificial intelligence has just finished analyzing a series of subsurface scans that should be physically impossible. Geophysicists from the international research team NOAA's Arc scans have mapped the legendary boat-shaped Rupinar formation using deep penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography. What the neural networks found buried under the heavy volcanic clay has left researchers in stunned silence. The geometry, the three-decked layout, the central corridors, none of it should exist under a geological mound on a mountain. Mainstream geologists have spent decades talking down to the public, claiming this 538-foot shape is a natural landslide. But the AI calculated less than a 3% probability that this perfect vessel-like symmetry formed by accident. It did not find natural bedrock. It found an organized, hollow structure. Let us show you exactly what these scans revealed, and why the truth is far more unsettling than we were ever told. Andrew Jones stands at the crest of the Rupinar Formation, his boots planted on ground that rises more than 6,500 feet above sea level. The outline beneath him stretches 164 meters from end to end, just over 538 feet, matching almost exactly the 300 cubit length described in Genesis if measured by the ancient Egyptian royal cubit. This is not coincidence lost on Jones or the team. Every measurement, every coordinate is logged with high-resolution GPS, locked to a grid that covers the entire boat-shaped mass, extending beyond its edges to capture the surrounding terrain. The survey grid is designed to leave no room for ambiguity. Each traverse is mapped with precision, each data point time-stamped and cross-referenced. For the June 2026 campaign, Jones directs a multimodal approach. Ground-penetrating radar is deployed across the full length of the formation, sending electromagnetic pulses deep into the volcanic clay. The radar arrays are tuned to frequencies typical for archaeological prospection, high enough to resolve meter-scale features, but capable of reaching several meters below the surface. Alongside, the electrical resistivity tomography system is laid out with 1-meter electrode spacing, a configuration that can reveal lateral changes and potential voids beneath the mound. These methods are standard in geophysical fieldwork, but the scale here is extraordinary. The entire 160-meter axis is scanned, with data points captured at intervals fine enough to construct a 3-dimensional volume of the subsurface. The field team operates under tight logistical constraints. The site lies within sight of the Iranian border, in rugged terrain shaped by ancient landslides and volcanic eruptions. Equipment is hauled up steep slopes, sensors checked and recalibrated against the shifting mountain weather. Every reading is backed by redundant storage, and each file is hashed and logged to preserve the integrity of the raw data. The acquisition protocols are modeled on best practices in forensic geophysics, chain of custody logs, metadata for every scan, and secure write once archival storage. What emerges from this effort is not just a set of measurements, but a digital fingerprint of the formation. The full 164-meter grid serves as the backbone for later analysis, anchoring any claims about internal corridors, deck geometry, or anomalous material signatures in verifiable field data. The dimensions alone, 538 feet in length, a width and height that echo biblical proportions, become the first hard benchmark against which all subsequent interpretations must be measured. The raw survey files, untouched by AI or interpretive software, are preserved for independent review. Every anomaly, every potential corridor or chamber is now locked to a physical coordinate in the Turkish soil, awaiting the next stage of forensic scrutiny. Subscribe for the next chapter as we dissect what the scans truly reveal beneath the mountain. A steel door swings open in a concrete lab outside Agri, where the raw survey files from the mountain are loaded onto an isolated workstation. Here, a convolutional neural network, the backbone of the AI pipeline, takes center stage. The lead developer, a former aerospace imaging specialist, stands by a wall of monitors, tracing the journey from unfiltered radar echoes to a single headline probability. The process begins with a UNet encoder-decoder architecture, a model refined on thousands of synthetic hulls, shipwrecks, and negative controls, landslides, synclines, and debris fields from across Eurasia. Each training example is labeled, its provenance logged and cross-checked. The model is not simply shown what a vessel should look like, it learns to distinguish engineered symmetry from the chaos of clastic sedimentation and natural fracture patterns. The Darupanar data enters the pipeline as a three-dimensional matrix of GPR and resistivity values, each voxel mapped to a physical coordinate on the mountain. The AI slices through this volume, scanning for geometric regularities, parallel corridors, right angles, stacked voids that would betray deliberate construction. At every step, the model's output is tested by Monte Carlo resampling. The raw data is shuffled, perturbed, and reanalyzed thousands of times, quantifying the odds that the observed patterns could have arisen by chance. This is not a single pass, but an ensemble approach. Multiple networks, each trained on different data partitions, converge on a consensus. The final result is distilled into a probability, less than 3% that the formation's internal structure is natural according to the model's own criteria. The number is not a guess or a gut feeling, it is the product of blind statistical inference, anchored in the provenance of the training data and the reproducibility of the pipeline. The developer is careful to note that the model's sensitivity to corridor-like anomalies and deck-level symmetries has been benchmarked on both real and simulated archaeological sites. Every output is archived, each probability traceable to a specific input and algorithm version. The claim, 3 decks, a central corridor, an atrium, is now quantified, awaiting scrutiny from both believers and skeptics. The system's logic is transparent, its biases and blind spots documented. The data, for the first time, has been given a voice that speaks in probability, not speculation. Dr. Murat Avci stands before the Darupanar outline, his field notes filled with decades of stratigraphic logs and fault diagrams. For Avci and most of the geological community, the formation story is written not in biblical proportions or digital anomalies, but in the language of Miocene limestone, volcanic clays, and the relentless mechanics of regional tectonics. He points to the exposed bedding planes along the flanks, each layer a record of ancient marine sedimentation, compressed and folded by the same forces that shape the surrounding Anatolian plateau. The so-called boat shape, Avci explains, is the product of a doubly plunging syncline. This is a natural fold in the Earth's crust, where layers arch downward in a broad canoe-like sweep. The Darupanar mass sits within this syncline, its symmetry and dimensions the inevitable result of compressional folding, not shipbuilding. Field mapping reveals that the central ridge is a hard limestone cap, underlain by a core of volcanic clay and breccia, a textbook example of clastic sedimentation and subsequent earth flow. The outline that draws so much attention is, in his assessment, a coincidence of geology and erosion, repeated in similar forms across the region. Avci addresses the radar and resistivity claims directly. In volcanic clay, he notes, ground-penetrating radar signals attenuate rapidly. The high conductivity of these clays limits penetration, often blurring or distorting reflections from deeper layers. Apparent corridors and voids can be artifacts, echoes of intersecting bedding planes, or the result of signal scattering along fractures and mineral seams. Electrical resistivity tomography, while powerful, is equally sensitive to moisture contrasts and natural fissures. High resistivity zones may reflect nothing more than dry pockets or air-filled cracks, not engineered chambers. He references earlier peer-reviewed surveys from the 1990s, which documented continuous, gently curving reflectors, hallmarks of synclinal folding. These signatures align with regional geological maps and digital elevation models, reinforcing the interpretation of Darupanar as a natural structure. The internal discontinuities highlighted by recent scans, Avci argues, are fully explained by the interplay of folding, landslide detachment, and subsequent weathering. No evidence of artificial construction survives careful scrutiny of the stratigraphy or the mineralogy. For Avci, the debate is not about dismissing new technology, but about the limits of geophysical inference in complex terrain. He welcomes independent review of the raw survey files and encourages transparency in data release. Until a multidisciplinary team can replicate the reported anomalies with open methods and publish their findings in the scientific literature, the formation remains, by every conventional measure, a striking but wholly natural product of Anatolia's turbulent geological past. A core sample extracted from the heart of the Darupanar Formation rests in a sealed case, its layers undisturbed since the December 2025 campaign. The man responsible for its custody, Dr. Farooq Kaya, is not a figure from the fringes of archaeology. As vice-rector of Agri Ibrahim Etienne University, Kaya commands both institutional authority and field experience. His role is to oversee every step of the Corps' journey, from the drill site through the chain of custody log to the laboratory bench where analysis begins. The first anomaly emerges not from digital scans but from the physical record itself. Embedded within the core, at a depth corresponding to the lower strata of the formation, researchers recover ceramic fragments. These are not modern debris. Petrographic examination and thermoluminescence dating, performed in collaboration with Istanbul Technical University, place the pottery firmly within the Chalcolithic period between 5,500 and 3,000 BCE. This is the era when early metallurgy and organized settlements first appeared in Eastern Anatolia. The fragments bear the hallmarks of local production: temper of crushed limestone, surface slip, firing marks, consistent with ceramics found at other regional sites from the same millennium. Kaya's team documents every step, photographing the shards in situ and logging their depth and orientation within the core. The laboratory protocol includes cross-checking with known regional typologies and, where possible, radiocarbon dating of organic inclusions. The results are clear: the pottery is ancient, predating the Iron Age and aligning with the timeline many ARC proponents cite for the biblical flood. Yet the context is forensic, not sensational. The ceramics are not found within a sealed chamber or cargo hold, but rather in reworked sediment, material likely transported by slope wash or human activity on the high flanks of Mount Tenderek. Still, the implications are significant. The presence of Chalcolithic pottery inside the formation establishes that human activity reached this altitude thousands of years ago. It introduces a cultural layer to the debate, one that cannot be dismissed as mere geological coincidence. For Dr. Kaya, the evidence does not resolve the question of artificial construction, but it does force a reconsideration of the site's archaeological potential. The core sample, with its ancient ceramics, now becomes a touchstone for the next line of inquiry: whether the surrounding soils and chemical signatures reveal further traces of past habitation or something even more anomalous lurking beneath the mountain surface. A series of sealed vials arrives at the Istanbul Technical University laboratory, each tagged with a GPS coordinate from the Darupanar core grid. The head of the analytical team, Dr. Elif Demir, slides a soil sample beneath the lens of a scanning electron microscope. The digital display fills with the intricate, lattice-like shells of foraminifera, marine microfossils that should not appear 2,000 meters above sea level, let alone inside a mountain. Demir's team catalogs the assemblage: foraminifera, ostracods, and rare coccolith fragments, all typically associated with ancient seabeds. The microfossils are not isolated to a single layer. They recur across multiple horizons within the core, embedded in fine-grained clay matrices. Chemical assays follow, targeting organic carbon and nutrient content. The results are difficult to ignore. Soil collected from within the formation contains nearly 3 times the organic matter of the surrounding matrix. Potassium concentrations inside the outline are elevated by over 40% compared to background levels. Dr. Demir points to the potassium spike as a possible indicator of decomposed plant material, potentially wood, or at least organic detritus, not native to the high volcanic slopes. The laboratory workflow is methodical. Each soil fraction is sieved, dried, and subjected to loss on ignition tests for organic content. Potassium levels are measured by atomic absorption spectroscopy. The team repeats the process for 30 separate samples, both from inside the boat-shaped mass and from control sites on the adjacent slope. The contrast is consistent. Organic matter and potassium are both systematically higher within the formation's boundaries. The presence of marine microfossils in a terrestrial, high-altitude setting raises immediate questions. Mainstream geological models for the region do allow for marine sediments to be uplifted by tectonic forces and for reworked clays to carry fossil traces far from their original source. Yet, the clustering of these signatures within a single, sharply delineated outline, one that matches the biblical ark's proportions, fuels debate over whether the formation is natural or engineered. Dr. Demir acknowledges the limitations. The microfossils could represent ancient marine clays reworked by landslides and earth flows, as regional geology suggests. The potassium and organic anomalies might be explained by episodic flooding or concentrated plant decay. Still, the pattern is unusual. The laboratory's findings add another layer to the forensic puzzle, a chemical and biological fingerprint that does not fit easily into either side's narrative. The next anomaly, already flagged by field botanists, lies not in the soil itself, but in the pattern of vegetation that grows above it. A narrow band of yellowed grass traces the outline of the Durapinar Formation each spring, visible from the ridge above as a ghostly silhouette against the darker hillside. Botanists on the 2026 campaign note the phenomenon with quiet precision. The vegetation inside the boat-shaped boundary consistently matures earlier, dries faster, and for a few weeks stands out as a pale ribbon set apart from the rest of the slope. No published agronomic study explains this anomaly. Supporters of the arc hypothesis point to the possibility of a subsurface void, a buried chamber or corridor altering the root zone moisture and soil temperature just enough to stress the grasses. Critics counter that shallow soil, compaction, or subtle changes in mineral content could account for the effect. The debate is unresolved, and no controlled measurements have been released to settle it. Access to the site itself is another point of friction. The Durapinar Formation falls under the jurisdiction of both the Turkish Ministry of Culture and the General Directorate of Mineral Exploration. Every attempt to drill, excavate, or even conduct deep geophysical scans requires official permits. In 2025 and again in 2026, the research team submits detailed proposals, requests for expanded core drilling, high-resolution electrical resistivity tomography, and extended sampling of the anomalous grass strip. The replies are cautious, sometimes terse. Letters from the ministry cite security concerns, the proximity to the Iranian border, and the need to preserve cultural heritage. Partial approvals are granted for surface surveys and non-invasive scans, but deeper coring and excavation are delayed or denied outright. Copies of the correspondence circulate among researchers, official stamps, signatures, and a recurring phrase, pending further review. The result is a patchwork of access. Field teams are allowed to walk the perimeter, map the vegetation, and collect limited soil samples, but any attempt to open a trench or probe beneath the outline is met with bureaucratic resistance. The yellow grass remains an open signal, visible but untouchable, its cause still unverified. For some, the pattern is a clue pointing to hollow spaces or engineered decks beneath the surface. For others, it is simply another layer of natural variation in a landscape shaped by landslides and ancient sedimentation. The tension between what can be seen and what can be tested grows sharper with each permit delay. The unresolved anomalies, including striped vegetation, unexplained soil chemistry, and rumors of buried corridors, fuel both suspicion and anticipation. The formation's secrets remain locked beneath the Turkish soil, awaiting the next round of investigation. Subscribe for the full forensic analysis as we move deeper into the interior model and the evidence that could finally tip the balance. Beneath the crest of the Durapinar Formation, nearly 20 feet below the surface, scan data reveal a corridor that runs almost the entire length of the boat-shaped outline. This passage measures 13 feet wide, its proportions standing out for their precision and scale. The corridor's boundaries are not speculative. They are mapped to a grid of geolocated points, each confirmed by ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography. The anomaly appears as a sharply defined low resistivity channel with parallel margins that maintain a consistent width across dozens of meters. In the digital reconstructions, the feature emerges with striking clarity, a central axis symmetrical along the formation's spine, with sidewalls that ignore the irregularities of natural bedding and instead follow a geometric path more typical of engineered structures. The corridor's depth, almost 6 meters beneath the surface, places it well below the weathered limestone and into the dense, clay-rich core. This is not a shallow crack or a surface fissure. Signal returns show a void that persists through multiple scan slices, resisting easy explanation as a random fracture or a byproduct of landslide activity. Radar reflections align in a pattern that is both linear and orthogonal, with side echoes hinting at possible compartmentalization or internal supports. Electrical resistivity tomography supports these findings. the passage registers as a zone of unusually high resistivity, standing in sharp contrast to the surrounding volcanic clay. In standard geological models, such a feature would be rare at this depth and scale, especially one that runs parallel to the formation's long axis and maintains a uniform width. Alignment metrics are exact. The corridor's centerline mirrors the symmetry of the Darupinar outline, running true north to south, and its width, 13 feet, remains within a margin of error of less than half a meter throughout the scan section. These measurements are rooted in the raw field data, cross-checked against original logs. The absence of significant lateral deviation, even as the formation narrows or widens, is flagged as a sign of deliberate construction. This central passage, 13 feet wide, nearly 20 feet down, and nearly as long as the formation itself, remains the most persistent and enigmatic anomaly in the subsurface model. Stacked within the Darupinar outline, the scan model isolates not just a single corridor, but 3 distinct horizontal planes, each one mapped as a separate level, spaced vertically through the heart of the formation. The AI-driven segmentation, trained to recognize engineered symmetry, flags these decks as discrete, parallel anomalies. Each plane is separated by several meters of dense material, with the uppermost level closest to the surface and the lowest buried deep within the clay-rich core. The upper deck appears as a broad, flattened reflector, its signal sharply defined against the overlying limestone cap. Below that, a second, narrower band emerges, running nearly the full length of the formation and maintaining a uniform elevation across the central axis. The lowest plane sits just above the basal breccia, its boundaries less distinct but still traceable within the resistivity volume. The vertical spacing between these planes is not arbitrary. Measurements extracted from the radar and ERT slices show a regularity that is unusual in natural sedimentary settings, each level separated by roughly equal intervals, echoing the tiered layout described in ancient vessel blueprints. The model's probability map assigns high confidence to these horizontal discontinuities, treating them as more than random bedding or landslide detritus. In the composite 3-dimensional rendering, the 3-deck geometry stands out, a layered sequence of voids and denser zones stacked like the floors of a ship's hull, connected by the central corridor already mapped in previous scans. Supporters of the Ark interpretation point to this arrangement as a direct analog to the biblical account, a vessel with multiple decks, each serving a different function, preserved in the mountain's core. They argue that the persistence and symmetry of these planes, especially when combined with the corridor and the overall proportions, exceed what would be expected from clastic sedimentation or synclinal folding alone. The geological counterargument holds that such horizontal features can arise from interbedded limestones and marls, compressed and sheared during the earth flow that shaped the mound. Yet the scan data, with its cleanly separated levels and regular vertical spacing, resists easy classification as mere geological happenstance. At this stage, the 3-deck signature becomes a focal point for both camps. For the research team, it is the strongest blueprint yet for deliberate internal architecture, a structure that, if confirmed, would redefine the site's significance. For skeptics, it is a challenge to explain through the language of regional stratigraphy and mass movement. The next layer of evidence, already surfacing in the scan reconstructions, hints at a vertical atrium, a feature that, if real, would further complicate the debate over what lies entombed beneath the Turkish earth. At the heart of the Darupinar scan model, a single feature commands attention: a vertical atrium mapped as a concentrated void that cuts through all 3 horizontal planes. The AI segmentation flags this core as the highest confidence anomaly in the dataset, a shaft-like hollow, nearly cylindrical in cross-section, running from the uppermost deck down toward the base of the formation. The signal concentration here is not subtle. Both ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography converge on this axis, recording a sharply bounded zone of low density and high resistivity that stands out against the surrounding clay and limestone. The void's geometry is consistent across multiple scan passes, its margins defined by abrupt changes in reflection amplitude and resistivity values. In the model's composite rendering, the atrium appears as a central well, interrupting the regularity of the horizontal decks and connecting them in a way that suggests deliberate internal organization. Yet, for all the digital clarity, the physical reality remains unconfirmed. no third-party team has replicated the scan results. The raw data, while archived and hashed for integrity, have not been released to the broader geophysical community, and no peer-reviewed publication has yet described the acquisition parameters or processing pipeline in detail. Independent geophysicists point to the absence of open data as a critical gap. Without external validation, the atrium, like the corridor and decks, remains a claim anchored in a single group's interpretation of proprietary scans. The technical literature on ground-penetrating radar is clear. Voids of this scale can be mimicked by intersecting bedding planes, root cavities, or even vertical fractures filled with air or dry sediment. In the volcanic clays of Eastern Anatolia, signal scattering and attenuation further complicate the picture, sometimes generating spurious reflections that mimic architectural voids. The verification gap is not lost on either side of the debate. Supporters of the arc hypothesis argue that the atrium's persistence across modalities, radar, and resistivity raises the bar for natural explanations. They point to the geometric regularity, the alignment with the formation's long axis, and the apparent connectivity between decks as evidence of engineered intent. Skeptics counter that, without replication, every anomaly must be treated as provisional, subject to the full range of geological and instrumental artifacts known to affect subsurface imaging in complex terrain. The absence of peer-reviewed confirmation leaves the central void suspended between awe and uncertainty, fueling both anticipation and caution as the investigation turns to the composition of the material itself, the next battleground in the search for a definitive answer to what lies beneath the mountain. A battered specimen box sits on a shelf in a private collection. Its contents are at the center of a controversy that refuses to fade. Inside, the so-called rivet samples from the 1980s Darupanar expeditions still bear the scars of a decades-old debate. Early proponents described these dense, metallic nodules as fossilized fasteners, evidence of lost technology embedded deep within the formation. The claim was bold that the material contained not just iron, but an engineered alloy, perhaps even titanium and aluminum, far beyond the reach of ancient Anatolian metallurgy. Laboratory reanalysis, however, tells a different story. Peer-reviewed reports from the mid-1990s document the mineralogy in detail. The rivets are identified as magnetite-rich concretions, nodules of iron and manganese with trace titanium, cemented by limonite and interleaved with volcanic clays and calcite. These are classic products of hydrothermal alteration and sedimentary bedding, not the output of a Bronze Age foundry. No crystalline titanium aluminum alloy, no smelted slag, no engineered microstructure. The magnetite signature is unmistakable, matching mineral seams that run through the regional synclines and landslide debris. Yet the rumors persist. In the wake of the June 2026 campaign, new claims surface on social media and in field reports that handheld LIBS and drone-mounted XRF scans have detected titanium and aluminum peaks inside the formation, signals that, if verified, would upend the established narrative. These spectral fingerprints, supporters argue, distinguish the anomaly from the surrounding magnetite and cement the case for a manufactured component. But no peer-reviewed spectra, calibration files, or laboratory notebooks are released. The spectral data remain locked in unverified press releases and video walkthroughs, unavailable for external audit. The credibility gap widens. On one side, the mainstream geological community points to the 1980s and the mid-1990s lab reports, magnetite, limonite, and clastic sedimentation, all products of natural processes well documented across Anatolia. On the other, the scan team and their advocates invoke the promise of modern spectroscopy and AI-driven anomaly detection, hinting at materials that would rewrite the region's metallurgical history. The tension is sharpened by the absence of raw data and the lack of independent confirmation. Every new claim is met with demands for open files, reproducible spectra, and chain of custody documentation. The dispute over the Darupanar material is not just about mineralogy. It is a test of how evidence is weighed, how rumors gain traction, and how the boundaries between natural formation and deliberate engineering are drawn. As the investigation presses deeper, the burden of proof shifts to those who would overturn decades of peer-reviewed analysis. The next phase will hinge on whether the alleged alloy peaks can withstand forensic scrutiny, or whether the formation's secrets remain bound to the slow chemistry of mountain weathering and volcanic clay. Rumors swirl around the Darupanar site, growing louder each season. The formation remains locked behind official barriers. In the absence of unrestricted access, speculation fills the vacuum. One persistent rumor traces back to a handful of anonymous forum posts and encrypted emails, claims that a foreign military, possibly NATO, conducted classified synthetic aperture radar surveys over eastern Turkey. These accounts allege that high-resolution scans captured a rectangular cavity beneath the Darupanar outline, sharper and more geometric than anything released by civilian teams. No documents have surfaced, no whistleblower has stepped forward. The only evidence is a blurred image, circulated in chat groups and stamped with a redacted date. Still, for those convinced the truth is being withheld, the existence of such scans is accepted as fact. Permit restrictions remain a tangible barrier. Every application for deep drilling, extended coring, or invasive sampling meets a familiar wall of bureaucratic caution. Letters from the Ministry of Culture cite security risks, the proximity to the Iranian border, and the imperative to protect cultural heritage. Researchers receive partial approvals for surface surveys, but requests to probe the most anomalous zones, corridors, decks, atrium are left pending or denied outright. The result is a patchwork of access. Field teams can map, log, and collect surface data, but the formation's interior remains off-limits. Each new delay feeds suspicion that critical evidence is being deliberately shielded from public scrutiny. In this climate, the call for transparency grows urgent. The research collective behind the June 2026 campaign responds with an outreach effort designed to break the impasse. A public waitlist is launched for the release of the full scan report and the upcoming investigative book. Supporters are urged to add their names, not just as readers, but as advocates for open science, demanding the raw ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography files, the AI model code, and the original metadata. The campaign's pinned comment directs viewers to the waitlist link, framing participation as a step toward forcing institutional transparency. The message is clear. Only collective pressure can pry open the archive and bring the raw data into the light. The formation's fate now hangs between rumor and revelation. The next move belongs not to a single researcher or agency, but to a global audience willing to demand answers. What would you ask of those who hold the keys to Darupanar's secrets? Subscribe for the final forensic verdict. Today, AI-driven electrical resistivity tomography and convolutional neural networks challenge entrenched geological models with hard probabilities, including a less than 3% chance of natural origin, a 3-deck geometry, internal corridors, and marine-clastic sedimentation at an improbable altitude. The clash between digital evidence and traditional stratigraphy now defines the frontier of this investigation. Until peer-reviewed access closes the data gap, the Darupanar anomaly remains a battleground for scientific certainty. What would convince you? Subscribe for updates as the search continues.